U.S. Border Patrol is now allowing asylum seekers to cross from Mexico into the United States to have their requests processed, reversing former President Trump's Remain in Mexico policy. But some of the families that followed the rules and camped out in tents along the Mexico border for years are now complaining that a lack of information about the policy changes is leaving them behind and in limbo. Mireya Villarreal has more on how some are now taking matters dangerously into their own hands.
In Matamoros, Mexico, this massive tent town is home to nearly 1,000 migrants. These are the families that followed the rules. They crossed into the U.S. through a checkpoint and were sent back to Mexico to wait for their asylum cases to be heard. Some have been here for 2 years. Sam Bishop is an Army veteran, providing essential medical help and other services for these migrants.
People's daily lives are here, and they've been here for so long that they've, like anywhere else, they've been able to establish and function. Yeah, it's a microcosm of a real, normal, functioning city.
We're not allowed inside the camp, so we talked to Perla Vargas through the fence. She and her daughter had to wait in Mexico for a year and a half, but are hopeful her case will finally get heard. Through the Remain in Mexico policy, more than 70,000 people were sent to Mexico to await asylum hearings, creating a bottleneck in cases during the Trump administration. While those people wait in limbo, others are crossing the border illegally and taking their chances with the new administration. Over the border in Brownsville, Texas, we met up with one of the moms in this group who says they crossed the river on a raft, paying a smuggler $800 for 2 people. They asked for asylum when they were picked up by Border Patrol. That process begins with a COVID test, and a negative result means they are released into the United States to wait for a hearing. Andrea Rudnick is with Team Brownsville, a grassroots organization working to help families gain asylum.
They're just choosing at this point not to even go through the process. That's right, because the word has gotten out that families with young children are getting across and getting released to go on to those families. I mean, it's catch and release all over again. Yes, it is. We're trying not to use those words, but yes, it is.
While the administration and Congress work through legislation, and Mexican officials say they don't have the resources to care for families like this anymore, people like Rudnick and her organization are left trying to fill the gaps.
For Team Brownsville, our motto has always been meeting the needs one family at a time. And that's really all I can think about. I can't think about 10,000 people, 100,000 people, 1 million people.
Okay, we want to bring in Camilo Montoya-Galvez. Now you have been covering all matters related to immigration and the border, and you have some really, really interesting reporting and concerning reporting about migrant children. You found some really concerning data. More migrant children are crossing alone, and shelter space for them is nearing capacity. Can you tell us just more about this? What did you uncover, and why are more children crossing the border unaccompanied now than before?
Yes, good morning, Emery. The number of unaccompanied migrant children taken into custody along the U.S.-Mexico border has been increasing steadily since the spring of 2020. Now we are seeing very concerning numbers along the U.S.-Mexico border. Just last week, more than 1,500 unaccompanied migrant children were taken into custody. On Sunday, Anne-Marie, more than 300 were taken in a single day. So these numbers are concerning. The Biden administration, shelter operators, and advocates, because the shelter space for them is near capacity. Nearly 90% of the beds that the U.S. Refugee Agency operates exclusively for unaccompanied children are currently full, Anne-Marie. That is because of several reasons. The main reason is because the coronavirus has forced the Refugee Agency to significantly reduce its bed space to implement COVID-19 mitigation policies. So right now they have about 8,000 available beds. More than 7,000 of those beds are currently full, Anne-Marie. So there is not a lot of space right now. And what is concerning advocates is that these children may now be forced to stay in police-like Border Patrol stations that government officials and advocates all agree are no place for children. These are cinder block cells with one toilet where children do not have beds. They often have to sleep on the floor. We saw images of this in 2014 and 2019 of overcrowded cells with families and children, and advocates and now the Biden administration are concerned that this scenario might repeat itself.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about sort of the mental health strain and burden that these children are carrying, and it's only made worse when they're essentially put in an environment that looks like a prison. So then, what's happening? Is there any talk of expanding housing for these children?
Yes, there is. The Biden administration on Monday reopened a Trump-era so-called influx facility to house unaccompanied migrant children. Unlike shelters, these influx facilities, Anne-Marie, are not subject to state licensing requirements, which is a concern for many advocates because they don't have the same oversight as shelters. They're congregate settings, but the Biden administration and some advocates argue that even these facilities are safer for children than the police-like Border Patrol stations. And so that is the situation that the Biden administration finds itself in. It is also considering opening a second influx facility in Florida and is also working to expand its bed capacity by 700 additional beds. And to get to the question of why this is happening now, Anne-Marie, if you remember, we were talking during the Trump administration about border officials rapidly expelling unaccompanied children without allowing them to seek asylum. That is not happening anymore. The Biden administration made a policy decision to not expel unaccompanied children under a Trump-era public health order and is now transferring them as required by law to the refugee agency. So that is a major policy change that is partly responsible for this uptick.
Okay, let us talk about some of the other changes under this new administration that we saw in Mireya Villarreal's story that has kind of led to a lot of confusion as well. Confusion for those taking the steps to cross the border. Some asylum seekers are being allowed to enter the U.S. through the official process, but have to wait for a negative COVID test. Other newly arrived migrants have crossed and been released. Can you just walk us through this process for asylum seekers with pending U.S. cases?
Yeah, there's been a lot of misinformation concerning this, Anne-Marie. What I will tell you is that the Biden administration is implementing a very limited and small-scale process to allow asylum seekers with pending remain in Mexico asylum cases to come into the U.S. along specified ports of entry. It started in San Diego, California last Friday, and it has now expanded this week to the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, which is the most highly transited part of the U.S.-Mexico border. As Mireya reported, we expect asylum seekers at the largest tent camp along the U.S.-Mexico border in Matamoros, Mexico, to be allowed in this week. They are registering for appointments. This is an orderly process, and it's very important to note that all of these asylum seekers, Anne-Marie, have to test negative for the coronavirus in Mexico before being eligible to be brought in. The Biden administration is admitting about 25 asylum seekers per day, so it is a very limited number, and it is prioritizing the cases of the most vulnerable, people who have medical conditions and families with children, as well as the cases of the people who have waited there the longest. So new arrivals who have no pending cases do not qualify for this protection, but as we've seen, many of them have continued to cross the border without legal permission, and some families are being released into the country.
So many moving parts, so many things changing. Camilo, we're really happy to have you keeping an eye on everything for us. Thank you.